Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to Kellie-Lynn, Tiffany, Hannah, and David. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you today. I'd also like to thank those guests who have joined us in the audience who were able to speak to the media earlier this morning. You are very brave. Others who have stepped forward have been bullied and canceled and condemned, and I sure hope that does not happen here today. It is vital that we have the opportunity to listen to all voices and learn from a number of people throughout these discussions. Throughout the years, we have seen that Albertans can pull together, and we need to continue to do that now. Because those who make a decision to discount other people's lived experience and expertise, and those who make a decision to target the health or safety or livelihood of those who disagree, are also making a decision to create division and encourage hate. And that is not the Alberta way. That is not acceptable in our province. We're also joined by the Minister of Health, Adriana LaGrange, Minister of Education, Dimitrios Nicolaides, Minister of Tourism and Sport, Joseph Scow, and Minister of Justice, Mickey Amery, to talk about changes we're proposing to protect the health and well-being of Alberta's young people and the safety of women and girls in competitive sport. And this includes children and youth in our province who identify as transgender and who experience gender dysphoria. I know this is a sensitive issue that's deeply personal to so many, and I'd like to reiterate what I've said many times before. We are here to support and uplift every child who identifies as transgender and who experiences gender dysphoria, as well as their families who wants what's best for them. Childhood is a time of self-discovery, and we want children and youth to have the time to gain experience and explore all opportunities available to them as they grow into adulthood. We also need to be cautious when it comes to young people undergoing procedures when we don't fully know all the risks. Today, our government is introducing 3 pieces of legislation that will set up guardrails to protect the health and safety of Alberta youth. First, we're proposing changes that would protect the future choices of minors who identify as transgender or who are experiencing gender dysphoria. If passed, the Health Statutes Amendment Act would prohibit physicians from performing all sex reassignment surgeries on minors. It would also prohibit the prescribing of hormone therapies, including puberty blockers, to treat gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, except in accordance with the exceptions set out by the Minister of Health. The exceptions will include minors aged 16 and 17 who have the approval of parents, physicians, and psychologists. In addition, minors who have already been prescribed hormone therapies to treat gender dysphoria or gender incongruence will be able to continue with this process. And I just want to reiterate that these policies are designed and intended to help preserve the choices children have before they make serious decisions about their bodies or the ability to have children of their own one day or undergo potentially permanent procedures where the benefits and risks are not yet fully understood. Today, we're also tabling the Education Amendment Act, which proposes changes to the way gender identity, sexual orientation, and human sexuality are discussed and taught in Alberta schools. The amendments we're proposing would bring more transparency, clarity, and consistency to Alberta's classrooms, while also respecting parents' indisputable role as caregivers. If passed, any student 15 and under who wants teachers or other school staff to call them by a new gender-related name or pronoun would need their parents to be notified and would require their parents' consent. Students who are 16 or 17 years old may do so without parental consent, but their parents would still need to be notified. Additionally, parents would have to be notified each time subject matter in the classroom deals primarily and explicitly with gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. As part of these specific changes, parents would have to opt their children in to those lessons instead of opt out, the way it is right now. And finally, as it relates to the specific policies in the Education Amendment Act, if it is passed, the Minister of Education, his ministry, would need to review and approve all learning and teaching resources, as well as all third-party presenters, on topics dealing primarily and explicitly with gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. The simple fact is that we have heard concerns about content, and we have seen some materials that have been shared at schools in Alberta or other jurisdictions that are not appropriate. We want to ensure the material that is being used to teach Alberta students is age appropriate. The final bill I'll talk about is the Fairness and Safety in Sports Act. It aims to ensure everyone can fairly and safely participate in the sports they love. Sport is an important part of many people's lives. For some, it is an outlet for extra energy or stress, and for some, it is almost a way of life, the path that they want to pursue in their future. This legislation will protect the ability of everyone to safely participate in sports. If passed, relevant organizations would need to establish policies regarding athlete eligibility. Regulations created under the Act would clarify specific requirements for these policies, including limiting women and girls' competitive sport divisions to female-born athletes. At the same time, in order to ensure that every Albertan can participate in the sport of their choice, we will support the formation of additional co-ed divisions. This legislation aligns with a report to the UN General Assembly from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, in which the Special Rapporteur calls for female categories in sport to be exclusively for biological female athletes, and for the creation of open categories in sport as part of a larger effort to maintain fairness while ensuring the ability of all to participate. All three pieces of legislation have been developed, drafted, and tabled with the express purpose of striking the right balance for the health, safety, and well-being of all children and youth in our province. We're also upholding the rights of parents to care for, teach, and protect their children. These amendments are about being fair and supporting children and youth now in the event that they later choose to make life-altering and potentially permanent decisions. As I've done every time I've spoken about these policies, I want to speak to the youth who are most affected. I and my entire government are here to support you and uplift you and your families. You are loved, and we are absolutely committed to ensuring that you receive the support you and your family may need. And finally, to every Albertan, especially adults, let's continue to work to depoliticize our discussions and focus on the well-being of those most affected by these policies. It's up to us to show that even if we disagree, we all care so deeply for all of our children and youth. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Kellie.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? I am Kellie-Lynn Pirie. My trans name was Kenneth. I am a Christian, a woman, and a detransitioner. Before I was 3 years old, my mom remarried to a convicted pedophile. The household I lived in until I was 13 was a chaotic mix of drugs, alcohol, and abuse. My 20s and 30s were a repetitive cycle of drugs, alcohol, sobriety, relapse, which was repeated. In 2004, at 37 years of age, after a lifetime of feeling uncomfortable in my body, constantly feeling the predatory gaze of both men and women, I began a process of transitioning female to male. In 2004, I underwent full social transition, part of which was choosing my male name, Kenneth Logan Anderson. In 2005, I started taking testosterone. In 2006, I had a complete hysterectomy. In 2007, I underwent a psychiatric assessment to obtain approval for a bilateral mastectomy. In 2008, I underwent a bilateral mastectomy, after which I was able to and did legally change my sex marker and my name to Kenneth Logan Anderson. In 2010, I realized that many of the feelings I had felt prior to and through my transition were not fully explored. I also realized that transitioning did not help me in any of the ways I thought it might. I still felt uncomfortable in my body. While I had psychological support prior to my medical transition, they did not help me dig deeply into my distress, specifically how trauma impacted my level of distress about being a woman. And that is a decision that I will live with for the remainder of my life. I made this decision as an adult. I simply cannot understand how, if I, as a 37-year-old woman with a post-secondary education, wasn't ready to make such a life-altering decision, how can we possibly support, encourage, or allow our children to do so? The decision to medically transition has impacted me physiologically. I will have type 2 diabetes for the rest of my life. It has had lifelong impacts on my confidence and my self-esteem. This is simply not a decision we can expect children to make. I am the founder of DeTrans Alliance Canada, an organization that was created to be a resource for people who are detrans, desisters, or regretters. As a detransitioner, I am a member of an ever-growing community of people who underwent gender transition, then later reverted back to our birth sex. The need for ethically based, comprehensive care for youth exploring their understanding of their self as a gendered being cannot be overemphasized. Today, Premier Smith will be putting forward legislation that is vital to preserving the rights for children to make informed adult decisions as adults. I am here today because I am proud to support these changes. Changes that specifically outline the boundaries and safety measures to ensure children and youth will be insulated from irreversible surgical alterations and life-altering pharmaceutical interventions prior to their obtaining the degree of physiological maturity necessary to understand how these interventions will impact their future. I believe the measures proposed will provide a nurturing environment in which youth are safe to question and explore aspects of their personality which are both congruent and not congruent with the social roles assigned members of their biological sex. Proper healthcare models, such as what Premier Smith has proposed, are grounded in a scientific atmosphere in which evidence-based practices are the standard and rigorous scientific debate is encouraged. These changes support a healthcare system that values diversity, autonomy, and dignity, and seeks to provide support services uniquely tailored to address a minor's understanding of long-term implications of the interventions being offered. I firmly believe the policies Premier Smith has proposed will empower youth to make incremental decisions as they progress along their path to self-discovery. Let me be clear. While transitioning was the wrong decision for me and something I came to deeply regret, I support transgendered men and women and their ability to make decisions for themselves as adults with access to comprehensive information, adequate mental health, and physical health supports. In conclusion, as a detransitioner, I care deeply about the health and well-being of gender nonconforming and gender questioning youth. And I want to thank Premier Smith for the courage she has displayed in setting into place policies and practices to ensure that young Albertans receive the safest and most effective care possible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Gillis. I'm a parent of two wonderful children in the Alberta school system. I'm the Vice President of Engineering of an Alberta-based oil and gas company, and I also happen to be a trans woman. And I'm very happy to be here today to support these measures to help me be better able to support my children as they grow and learn. And I'm grateful that myself and other LGBT people were included in the consultations to develop these policies. Parents have the primary responsibility for our children's education, and the education system exists to support us in that role, not the other way around. A parental right to be notified of and opt in to any instruction around sensitive subjects, such as human sexuality, sexual orientation, and gender identity, is the only way we can fulfill that responsibility. Also, knowing that all third-party materials have been vetted before being used in schools allows Alberta parents to have an extra layer of comfort knowing that their children aren't being exposed to inappropriate materials in school here. Adolescence is a confusing time as it is, and as a trans woman myself, I personally know how hard and confusing issues of sexuality and gender identity can be on top of that. That only makes it all the more important for children to have parental guidance and support when navigating these issues. Some children who come to identify as transgender will grow up to be transgender adults, and some will not. In an age of psychological care that focuses only on affirmation, a child who is struggling with their identity and decides to start using a different name or pronouns in school could find themselves on a road to irreversible medical care that is unneeded or could even be harmful, or could even have harmful lifelong consequences for them. That's why parents must be involved at the start of the process by having the right to know and consent to their children changing the names and pronouns at school. I know that almost all the people who disagree with these policies are well-meaning, but the default assumption must be that parents are loving and want what is best for their children, and that they should be involved in all their major life decisions. Some LGBT activists who suggest otherwise come off as attempting to recruit rather than support, and have caused many people to become less accepting of LGBT people as a whole. I believe the safeguards being introduced in Alberta will protect children and help parents, and I do believe they strike the right balance and will help to depoliticize the issues around gender identity.
My name is Hannah Pilling, and I'm an 18-year-old track and cross-country athlete. I've spent my whole life running and have been doing it competitively for the past 10 years. Currently, I'm competing at the post-secondary level, and I am proud to have just been awarded Rookie of the Year at the Alberta Athletics Conference. Running has been a passion of mine since I could first walk. Last year, I found myself competing against a transgender athlete in my school zone track meet. As I stepped onto the track for the 1,500-meter race, I was both nervous and determined. I stayed near the front for most of the race, then 3 of us broke away from the rest of the pack. For nearly the entire race, the transgender athlete and I ran neck and neck. In the final 200 meters, we picked up the pace and I pushed hard, confident in the training I had put into my finishing kick. In the final 50 meters, my competitor began to pull away. I crossed the finish line in 3rd place, missing the cutoff for provincials by half a step. It was crushing. I had trained for years with this goal in mind. Afterward, many of my fellow racers were left in tears, knowing that the outcome wasn't fair. The sense of hopelessness was overwhelming. I pleaded with the meet director, explaining it was unfair for a biological male to compete in high school girls' sports. She seemed sincerely sorry, but claimed that regardless of her beliefs, there was nothing she could do because those were the rules. Then the rules need to change, I screamed inside. My frustration, concern, anger, and sadness were not directed at my transgender competitor. I believe everyone should be able to participate in sports, but it must be done fairly and safely. Eventually, an exception was made and I was allowed to race at provincials. While initially excited, it felt as though I was being allowed to participate simply to quiet the controversy. Being allowed to race at provincials did not solve the issue at the core of the matter. There are physiological realities that make the participation of a biologically male athlete in women's sport fundamentally unfair. Throughout the provincial meet, people approached me and my family, recognizing me and expressing their support. I received messages from female athletes who had encountered similar situations, sharing how competing against biologically males had affected them physically and emotionally. Their stories emphasized to me that this issue is not just about my experience, but it is a broader concern. Though it was a challenging journey, this experience showed me that many others share my concern about fairness in women and girls sports, and that there is a real need to take decisive action to safeguard women's sport for the athletes of today and the generation to come.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah's dad. My name's Dave Pilling. I'm a parent to 3 athletic daughters and a professional in the sport and recreation industry. You just listened to my daughter, Hannah, talk about her experience. The physical difference between boys and girls on the field were once common knowledge, until suddenly they weren't. It felt like overnight, biological males who identified as girls started competing in girls' sports, running alongside them, wrestling, playing rugby, and even competing in combat sports. At first, this trend felt strange and unfair, but it didn't seem to affect us directly until it did. We've all experienced wins and losses. That's the beauty of sport. It teaches us to deal with those things. But not like this. This was different. I've worked for years in recreation. I've been part of countless discussions on increasing sports participation and creating inclusive environments. I believe everyone deserves an arena to compete in, but not like this. Inclusivity for one group cannot come at the expense of another group. Inclusivity cannot come at the expense of fairness in women's sports. When girls step onto the track, the court, or the field, they should not have to face competitors who bring inherent physical advantages that fundamentally alter the playing field. Girls and women have fought for decades to secure their place in athletics, and we must not allow this trend to undermine that progress. Our family didn't set out to wade into a controversial issue, but we found ourselves at the forefront of a fight that's become increasingly significant. In February, when Premier Smith announced a policy to preserve women's sports for biologically female athletes, we felt a deep sense of relief. Finally, someone recognizes the need to uphold the safety, fairness, and opportunities that generations of female athletes have fought so hard to secure. With this legislation, Premier Smith and her government will ensure future generations are able to compete on a level playing field.
Great. Thank you, David. Thanks to all of our speakers today. We're going to turn it over to media. It'll be one question, one follow-up. Please state your name and outlet for the record. We will start here in the room, and then we'll go to the phones. Shay, I see you at the mic. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's Shailan Skalski with CTV News Edmonton. Question for the Premier. In the tech briefing, the officials couldn't tell us how many trans athletes these legislative changes would affect. We also heard that gender reassignment surgery was not already happening for minors, with top surgery being very rare. And one of the doctors you consulted with said we don't actually know how often puberty blockers or hormone therapy is actually being used for anyone under the age or 15 and under. It appears your own government and those you consulted with is not clear how many people this will impact and why it's needed. So why did you feel it was so important to come forward, enshrine these changes into law as one of the first pieces of legislation this fall session?
Well, I think we've watched from around the world as new information has come in, particularly I think the most comprehensive review of all the evidence in the CAS report in the UK. There are also other European countries that have identified that there needed to be some guardrails around the medical side of transitioning, and that's what we're doing. We're wanting to make sure that children do not prematurely make decisions that are going to impact their long-term health, impact their long-term ability to have kids, and be able to make those decisions as adults. So we've looked around the world, and we think that this is the appropriate method to go forward to make sure that everybody's rights are protected and everybody's choices are protected. I think it is the case, and we've all read stories of top surgery being done and on minors. And it's not going to happen anymore. Bottom surgery is not being done on minors, but we wanted to make it clear that neither are going to be eligible for minors. And when you begin, what we have seen with the CAS report is that as kids go into puberty blockers, that it's almost a 100% transition into cross-sex hormones and then onto full transition. So that very first step of going on puberty blockers is kind of the essential one that needs to be made with care and concern, and with the full understanding of the consequences.
Just some clarity in my first question and then my follow-up. What evidence do we have that it's happening here? You cited examples in the UK and in Europe, in other areas of the world, but I'm asking about the province of Alberta, in which this legislation will be taking effect. And then in terms of my follow-up, both the Alberta Bill of Rights and the Charter protect things around gender expression and identity. So how confident are you that you're going to be able to get these changes through without the notwithstanding clause, or are you prepared to use it?
Well, look, I mean, if it's not happening at all, then there shouldn't be any controversy around putting the guardrails around it. If it is happening, then we're going to be able to protect those kids until they're older. I think that we do have, all we can do is look at the prescribing practices of doctors, and yes, Lupron is prescribed to those under the age of 18. Sometimes it is prescribed for the purpose of early onset puberty, and that's a legitimate use. But we do know it's being prescribed, and we don't know how many instances it's being described for that use or for gender transition. We do also know that there is a breast reduction done on those under the age of 18. Now, maybe that's being done because of comfort. Some women with who need that for comfort's sake, and that's an appropriate use. But then there are those who we understand are getting it for the purpose of gender transition, and we think those decisions should be delayed. So we can just look at the practices that are being done. So we know that those are both practices that are happening in Alberta, and we just want to make sure that it's very clear that those are adult decisions to be made by adults. As for expression and identity, I guess we'll see. I believe that we've created a balance here. That's what we were looking for, is what is reasonable. What is a reasonable amount of decision making to happen with young people? We have all kinds of restrictions on the ability of minors to make decisions. And we do that because we want to make sure that they are of full capacity to be able to make decisions that are going to be consequential to them. So that's if it comes to it and that's the argument that we need to make, that's the argument that we will make.
Hi, Graham Thompson from the Star. Premier, just to repeat the question again on this issue of you're going to prohibit health professionals from performing sex reassignment on minors. And as you've said, and I talked to the tech briefing this morning, there's nothing happening. I guess there's maybe top surgery, not bottom surgery, but how many top surgeries are being done in terms of sex reassignment?
We don't have the answer to that.
Well, see,
more than one.
Well,
because we have statistics.
According to the tech briefing this morning, it's rare. So if it's rare on top and you don't even know the number, and the bottom is not being done, then why did you feel necessary to bring in this amendment when it's not really going to?
Well, we're watching lawsuits happen all over the world.
All over the world. Is it happening in Alberta?
All over the world, lawsuits are happening of young people who have transitioned and received surgery. I think, yes.
Is that happening in Alberta?
But the point is, it is happening in the medical profession, and we want to make sure that it doesn't happen in Alberta. And if it's not happening, there's no controversy. And if it is happening, we're going to be making sure that our medical professionals know that this is a treatment that's available for adults only.
And my follow-up is timing. You've been asked about this all week regarding your announcements this week. Tomorrow is the AGM for your party. Saturday is a leadership review. Are you doing this now? Why do this today and not maybe next week or the week after? Are you doing this ahead of your AGM because your members have been insisting on things like this?
Well, Graham, you've been a member of the Alberta Press Gallery for a long time. You know that we got policy that was passed in November. When you're in November, you're passing policy that you worked on in the previous spring. When you're passing policy in the spring, you're working on policy related to the budget. And then you have an opportunity through the summer to do the consultation. We announced this in February in the middle of spring session. You have a period of time where you have to do the work with your department, draft the legislation, get it through Cabinet Policy Committee, get it through caucus, get it through Cabinet, develop it with Parliamentary Council, make sure that you're appropriately drafting it, and then it gets introduced. I think that's the reason for the timing.
But then why not do it next week? Why today ahead of your convention?
We've got a 4-week session, Graham. I mean, we have a constituency. We have 2 weeks, and then a constituency break, and then another 2 weeks. So we have 13 pieces of legislation that we need to get through, and we need them introduced so that we can start debating them.
Thanks, Premier. We're going to move on to the next question. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, Lisa Johnson with the Canadian Press. I want to go back to the charter proofing question that was asked previously, and you mentioned that we have reasonable restrictions on minors in other ways, but just looking at Saskatchewan's experience with very similar pronoun law. Obviously, there was a challenge, and they had to use the notwithstanding clause. And you talk about you're confident that this legislation is balanced, and don't anticipate having to use a notwithstanding clause. But when we were talking with government officials this morning, trying to dig down on what is the difference between Alberta's pronoun law compared to Saskatchewan, right? What makes it unique? They pointed to targeted mental health supports for trans youth, but I'm looking at the Saskatchewan law, and there's a clause that looks absolutely the same as what the Alberta government is talking about here. If there's a reasonable expectation that parental consent is going to result in physical, mental, or emotional harm to a student, principal shall direct them to appropriate professionals who are employed or retained by the school. So what is the difference between the Saskatchewan bill and the Alberta bill that you're introducing today that makes it unique and charter-proof?
Well, look, I mean, one of the things that I would observe is that those who have transitioned, they don't want anyone to use their dead name, and they don't want to be mispronounced. And so it seems incongruous to me, if we're supporting the mental health of a child, that they would be one name and one gender at school and then be misgendered and misnamed at home. I can't imagine what kind of impact that would have on a child mentally to have to do that. And so we are of the view that if there is an official name change where everyone in the school community knows that that individual is going by a new name, new pronouns, using the washrooms, using the locker room, you can't have everyone in the world know that except the parents. We believe that you have to have consistency, and if you are going to support the mental health of a child, they have to be supported, and that's why you cannot have parents and families out of the mix. Parents need to know what's going on with their kids.
You're talking about your justification for the legislation, but I'm asking you to explain how it's charter-proof.
I'm explaining the justification that we'll put forward, and the charter allows for limits on rights that are reasonable in a free and democratic society. We think what we're putting forward is reasonable.
And my follow-up question is in regards to the new sports rules that are coming forward. We didn't really get a lot of specific details in terms of how the new rules will be enforced. So there's a lot of questions about that, but some government officials, again, pointed to those sporting organizations relying on birth certificates. But in Alberta, you can change the sex and gender markers on your birth certificates currently. So is your government considering taking away the ability to change those sex and gender markers, or is the sporting rules not going to touch birth certificates? How are the sporting rules going to be enforced?
Do you have more you want to say on that, Scal?
Not birth certificates.
Come on.
Well, thank you for the question. I think the answer is pretty short. It's not necessarily birth certificate, but registration of sex at birth.
Great, thanks. Emmanuel?
Hi, Emmanuel Perez-Lovett, Radio Canada. So, Premier, your government is prohibiting hormone therapy and is prohibiting doctors from prescribing hormone therapy or puberty blockers to minors. But isn't that a direct attack on their medical independence? What if they really think that it's for the best of their well-being of their patients for them to prescribe that type of drug?
Look, doctors were given a lot of latitude to prescribe opioids, and now we have a fentanyl crisis as a result of inappropriate prescribing, and we've had to put guardrails around who can prescribe opioids, how they can be delivered. And I would say doctors aren't always right. This has supreme consequences on young people, on their ability to, if you're medicalized for life, it has consequences. If you are medicalized too early, it has consequences on fertility. And we believe that sometimes you have to step in and make sure that you're preserving choice and protecting the rights of kids so that they can make those decisions as adults.
Great. And on sports, how will sports organization really verify who can compete or not in women's categories? Because my understanding is you're kind of passing the buck down to them. So doesn't that open the door to some inequity between different sports?
Well, I think the minister said that it's the You have to demonstrate the registration at birth. That would be the way it would be done. And sports has all kinds of testing that they do because they want to make sure that there's fairness. So I think that what we have heard is that the sports entities, competitive sport entities, want the ability to create biological female and women-only divisions, and we're being permissive. But we also want to create open categories so that all athletes can compete.
Great, thanks. Jonathan, go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. You spoke about an exemption being granted for the restrictions on gender transitions in minors for those who have begun hormones and puberty blockers. Why did you feel compelled to grant that exemption?
Well, if somebody is already well in the process, then we're not going to retroactively change their circumstance. But it's for any new individual. We want to make sure that the protections are in place, that they're old enough to be able to make the decision and understand the consequences, and that there's a multi-professional team, includes their parents, doctors, and psychologists that are able to assist them in making that decision. And we believe the age to have that level of maturity begins somewhere around age 16, 17, which is why we're making that exception.
Okay, my follow-up pertains to the name and pronoun changes in schools. So certain teachers on social media have said they're going to refuse to comply with the policy once you bring it in. There was even a teacher who called into your radio show saying that he wasn't going to comply with that policy. What will you do to ensure all teachers comply with the name and pronoun change policy?
Well, look, I mean, if you have the entire school community who knows a child's new name and gender, eventually the parents are going to find out. You have, I can't even imagine how that would work. So for school report cards, for school assemblies, for athletic appearances, for plays, everyone is going to, have some great pretense when the parents show up to participate in that? I mean, I'm not even sure what they're talking about. If a child is out with a different name and different gender in school, you can't have a situation where the only people who can't know are the parents. That interferes with the family relationship. It interferes with the parental bond with parents, and it's entirely inappropriate. We believe in parental rights.
Will there be any form of disciplinary action taken against teachers who refuse to comply?
We have a discipline process. I mean, remember, the Alberta Teachers Association, a number of years ago, we made the decision that for discipline actions, we had to create a new commission. And so if it does come down to it, that the teachers are defying this direction, then there will be a disciplinary process available.
Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, Catherine Gurkowski, Alberta Today. Again, back to the parental rights. There are a wide range of conditions and treatments in childhood that have lifelong impacts that can affect fertility. I'm wondering why for this specifically you want to remove that parental right to make that decision with the doctor and the parent and the child.
Well, look, we've had a couple of recent instances where an individual has been sterilized without their knowledge, consent, or understanding by someone else, and then we've had to pay compensation for it. When governments in the past made the decision to sterilize individuals determined to be mentally feeble, that ultimately resulted in a massive lawsuit and compensation. Right now, there were hearings in the Senate of Indigenous women who want criminal code sanction for doctors who made the decision to sterilize them. I'm watching with great interest how that proceeds. So 20 years from now, if we were to have children sterilized, they will come back and say, who's responsible? And we just do not believe that this is something that's appropriate. A person has the right to determine their own fertility. Another person cannot decide that on their behalf. And we have to be able to protect the right of kids to be able to make those choices when they're adults.
And on the opt-in provisions, there's already the right for parents to remove their child from class if they don't want to be taught that. But a lot of educators are saying this is going to add a hurdle. They might not even bring in plans. So why, when 1 in 3 Albertans are sexually abused under the age of 18 and STI rates are skyrocketing, why put barriers in place to receiving education on sexuality?
Well, look, I mean, I think the problem has become that all of these things are intermingled, and it may well be that parents would opt into one type of sex education and not another, and that's their right. Under the School Act, we have a specific policy that parents have the right to choose what their children are exposed to, and we're just adding this additional provision. I would say it's no more complicated than getting parental buy-in on a field trip, which happens a lot, that you have to send home and get consent forms for a field trip. So I don't think it's going to be any additional work. They have processes in place to be able to get the opt-in on each of these instances for structured education, and I think parents need to know, especially because I think parents want to be able to talk to their kids, and when they do opt in, want to be able to talk to their kids about it afterwards. That shouldn't be something that's a surprise to parents. Parents should be fully informed on all instances, and that's what we've heard from parents that they want, and that's what we'll deliver on.
Thanks, Premier. We're going to take a break and go to the phones. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
The first question is from Matthew Black from the Edmonton Journal. Please go ahead.
Oh, good morning. We asked at the tech briefing about how many athletes the sports policies might affect, but they weren't able to say, and I don't know if you or the minister has that figure, but I'm just curious how you make policy when you don't know how many people it affects.
Do you want to come? I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, thank you for that question, Matthew, and it's a very good one. We don't keep track of those specific numbers, but what I can tell you is it affects athletes like Hannah standing right behind me. And there's potential to affect so many other athletes around the province of Alberta. And so we're taking steps to ensure that there is fairness and safety and, of course, inclusion in sport and protecting women and girls as they play.
All right. You mentioned safety there, but, I mean, physical disparities happen in all sports at all levels, particularly at the youth level. I'm looking right now at a high school football roster. There's a 285-plus pound lineman going up with a running back who's half that weight. How's the safety risk there any different from the risks you're citing in introducing these bills?
Well, look, why do we have women's categories at all? Like, why did they even develop? If there's no difference between men and women, why haven't we always just had co-ed sports? I mean, I think because what we realized is that at a certain age, somewhere around age 12, as puberty takes hold, you end up with a difference in ability, capability, strength, speed, agility, hand-eye coordination, and that is part of the reason why we developed women and girls sports in the first place. The other thing I'd say, it's vitally important to have sports in the background. The vast majority, I think it's somewhere in the order of 90% of the women who are in executive positions have an experience in team sports. I played volleyball, I played basketball, and I don't want kids getting demoralized because they feel like it's stacked against them and it's unfair. I think if we're going to support equality, and we're going to support pathways for women and girls to achieve their highest level possible, not only in sport but in life, we have to make sure that we understand that there are differences and protect that.
Operator, next caller, please.
Next caller is Mike Campbell from the Counter Signal. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. Have you consulted with any detransitioned men or women as young adults who highly regret being given hormone blockers when they were young and confused? And if so, can you speak to how that impacted your decision?
Kelly, do you want to comment on that?
Through DeTrans Alliance Canada, I've had several young detransitioners reach out to me. What has impacted them the most was when they began to talk about desistance. They were told they were simply struggling with internalized transphobia. And the one young girl went ahead and had a bilateral mastectomy at 17. And after that, she realized that it did not address her mental health issues. And when she insisted with her doctor that transitioning had not helped her, her doctor refused to see her again. Her counselor terminated therapy, and the LGBT two-spirit support group she had been in banned her as hateful and harmful. And I think that's unacceptable. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Is there a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the educational-related proposed changes, do you think that this will ensure that gender ideology isn't taught to young children, or will teachers still be able to teach it in their own ways? For example, there are hundreds of pictures online of grade 1, 2 classrooms having posters on the classroom wall that have student names and their pronouns under it.
Well, look, I mean, if there is going to be formalized instruction about sexual orientation, gender identity, gender ideology, and sexuality, parents are going to have to be able to opt in to that formal instruction. It is not meant to impact incidental reference to any of those topics in a classroom. It's the formal instruction, and so I would put it to parents that if they're satisfied with the materials being presented in the classes, they'll opt in. If they aren't, they'll opt out.
Thanks, Premier. We have time for 2 more questions. Operator, next caller, please.
Next question is from Mark Villani from CTV Calgary. Please go ahead.
Mark, you there? Mark, one more time. Okay, operator, can we move to the next person? We can come back to Mark, maybe.
The next question is from Lauren Heinz from 660 News Radio. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking my question. You and various people in support of this policy have repeatedly said that you want to depoliticize this conversation and that creating this legislation will help you do that. Is that not, in fact, the opposite of the opposite solution to the problem? I mean, creating policy does inherently not depoliticize an issue.
Well, look, part of the practice of government is when you identify something that's a problem, you have to put a legislative framework in place to address it. And we have identified that there are some problems. And so this is what we're trying to do. We're putting guardrails around when these decisions can be made for children who have the maturity to understand the consequences. We're making sure that parents are included in the decisions that affect their kids. And we're making sure that biological women and girls have the ability to compete in sport. Those are areas that we identified where there were problems, and we're going to create some solutions.
Lauren, do you have a follow-up?
Sure. In terms of consultation, I know that you and your government have spoken to various people from the LGBTQ community in reference to this. Can you speak to people or organizations who perhaps are in opposition to your legislation that you consulted with? Did you get a well-rounded view of this issue and the people that it affects before you introduced these policies?
Yeah, we did do a roundtable, and the individuals at the table who shared our concerns were bullied and condemned and canceled. And so we realized that not every voice is going to be constructive in this conversation. So we reached out to every constructive voice that we wanted to, who we felt would come to the table in a respectful way and be respectful of the people who were around the table as well. And I sure hope that the brave people behind me don't end up with the same kind of bullying when they leave here today.
Great. Operator, can you please put through the last caller?
The last question is from Paula Tran from Livewire Calgary. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This morning at the technical briefing, it was confirmed that these pieces of legislation will apply to Two-Spirit youth as well. So I was wondering if you and your government has consulted with Indigenous individuals or organizations.
Well, what I would say is that our legislation only applies to the schools that are off reserve schools. First Nations or separate nations, they have their ability to create their own policies. And this will apply to anyone who is in a school that we do have the mandate to govern. I personally think that all parents want to know what's going on with their kids, regardless of whether they come from Indigenous households or non-Indigenous households. So I would expect that would be something that would be an expectation on the part of First Nations parents. And I believe that it doesn't change the decision. If you have a level of maturity that you want to get to before you start medically transitioning, it doesn't matter what your race is.
Premier, respectfully, you didn't answer my question. So were Indigenous organizations and individuals consulted before deciding that these policies will include Two-Spirit use?
Well, as I said, it doesn't have an impact on First Nations. We don't govern First Nations, so they'll be able to make their own decisions.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That concludes our press conference for the day.
Thanks, everyone.